Hi, Jagadich. Welcome. Thank you for tuning back in and joining us. My name is Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's. Really excited to have you back today. We're going to have a great conversation with Jennifer McCann. Before I get any further along, I just want to make that quick introduction. Jennifer, how are you doing?
Doing great. And yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm doing really well. How are things there?
Oh, things are great. I mean, quiet enough in terms of, I'm just looking out the window here, beautiful day. Yes, things are grand.
Outstanding. Now, I want to get to talking about your relationship with Bobby and also your time in the mid 1980s. But to do all that stuff, I want to kind of set the stage for viewers who may not have a familiarity with you at all. Would you mind talking just a little bit about kind of, where you're from, how you grew up, did you grow up in a Republican family? Like what kind of set the stage for us a little bit?
Well, I mean, I was born on the Falls Road. My granny and granda lived there most of their lives. They wouldn't have been a Republican family, probably a nationalists, in terms of the historical context. I think that basically we had to move out of our home in West Belfast in the early 60s, 1960s, because my daddy had to get work and we moved out for him to get work. So we moved to an area around an estate just outside Rathcoole, and it was a predominantly unionist estate. So obviously when things started taking off in terms of the civil rights protests and then the people's houses being burnt on the Bombay Street and then the Falls Road and everything else, and the pogroms basically started beginning where Catholics were getting intimidated out of the areas, and we had to move back in to West Belfast again in 1972. It was like a lot of people around then, Bobby's family included. We all had to sort of just up sticks and go very quickly because you were literally running for your life. Before we had to do that, as I said, the very early stages of the conflict, 1968, 69, whenever Catholic homes were being attacked on the peace lines and that from the Shankill. My granny lived in one of those streets, one of those areas. Sorry. So we like any sort of family then, with the extended family, we would have stayed with my granny and granda at summer holidays, school holidays. We would have stayed there at weekends and that, and we would have been sort of lying in bed at night. So I remember as a very young child lying in bed at night, about 9, and hearing the shooting going on, and the next day you were coming out and you would have seen all the sort of the places being burnt and that. And I remember one thing that stuck out in my head was the time young Patrick Rooney was shot dead. He was a 9-year-old from Divis Flats, and it was like, I think it was the B specials and the RUC were lying on a roof in a mill close near to the thing, and loyalists were attacking people's Catholic homes in the Falls Road. So he was shot dead. He was lying sleeping in bed. I could remember because he was the same age as me. He was, only a young child. Yeah. And, all those things in the Falls Road curfew, all those things. While I was quite young, I was still very much, watching, things like that happening and unfolding and everything else. So, as I said, in 1972, then on Halloween night, we had to move from our other home, and we moved into Twinbrook in West Belfast. And then in Twinbrook, the houses were they weren't finished. Basically, we came in and you'd no electricity, you'd no running water, you'd no toilet facilities, you'd no windows actually in your windows or doors on your doors. And workmen were helping people because people were just coming in their droves because obviously the intimidation. I think it was, and Bobby's family would have been from Rathcoole as well, and other families. So that was the way you were living then. So then I grew up in Twinbrook Estate then from I was about 12. And that would be my background. Obviously as a young person growing up in West Belfast, like all young people, it was the most militarized area in Western Europe at that time. So I mean, you had the same sort of you were in terms of searches by the British Army or the RUC, searching your school bags, going to school. You couldn't come out of your house and you wouldn't have been sort of way faced with that. People were being killed, people's homes were being attacked. So you had all that going on, and so that they were the sort of impressions that I had at a very, very early age.
Wow, that's an impressive story to listen to. Now, during this time period in let's say the early to mid 1970s is when you first meet Bobby Sands. Can you tell me just a little bit about what it was like, what he was like, what your first impressions were, just kind of, he's a legendary figure now, but at that time he was just a young man living in West Belfast. So could you touch on that?
Yeah. I mean, I knew Bobby's family before I ever met Bobby. And I remember Bobby came out of prison, I think it was early 1976. I mightn't get my type, but it was early 1976. And I remember, when he came out, and people were, obviously, you knew his family, and, you were happy to see someone being released and that. But at a very, very, very quickly, he became a very, very significant figure in the Twinbrook area. He, for instance, he started up a tenants association. He was very much into community politics, even way back then. He started up a tenants association, and that would have sort of developed into putting things on for young people, like football clubs, local disco. There was a local disco in the local hut. But he was also involved in the cultural and the language aspect of things as well. He started up the first ever Nisco in terms of the Irish. Sorry, Nisco na Fishika. It's like a school. It's a school for pre-school children who want to be taught in Irish.
Okay.
So he was instrumental in setting up those Irish the Irish schools in Twinbrook, and also there's a new Irish family centre in Twinbrook that was recently opened a few years ago. That all came from him in terms of he sort of was instrumental in setting that up. And I mean, even now, because it's Scoil na Frisige, which means the School of the Lark, and Bobby's name still now. He wrote a short story about a lark and the freedom fighter years ago, and from his death, that he's always been associated with the lark. That's something that's always. So that's where that all came from. And you see the lark at the side of the school even now. Around the corner here, and it's. I don't think a lot of people know that, but that's where it came from. Very much into helping young people, very much into helping the local community. And for us that were run about then, I mean, we were all 15, 16, 17-year-old teenagers. And while he was only 6 years older than me, he wasn't that, much older than me. He was very, very influential in our lives, in that, he was inspirational to us, very inspirational, very, very ordinary person, but a very, very, you could see even then somebody who was way ahead of the politics at the time, because he was so much into the community, and he knew by building up the community infrastructure and by building community activism that was the way forward in terms of the politics of later as well. And I think also, I mean, if people would say to me, when you're saying yourself, like he's sort of well known, he's a legend everywhere now, but he was a very ordinary person, but just doing an extraordinary thing even then. He put himself out. He was energetic. He was, I would actually say, sometimes hyper, but he was very, very energetic, and loved music and loved the language, but loved ordinary things as well. So that would be my first impressions of him.
It's so wonderful to hear about Bobby's life. I feel like a lot of times, we have we limit our own story of Bobby to just simply prison and hunger strikes. But from what you're saying, which are very important. I'm not downplaying them at all. But from what you're talking about community activism and being very involved in the community, which is a story that I don't believe a lot of people are aware of. And it's so amazing to hear, but it just begs in my head, like, how does a man have time for all? I mean, that's not a small amount of stuff. And he goes back into prison in mid 76. And so he's only out for a very brief period of time. And in that time, he gets a school going and he does all these, these tenant associations and all the rest of that stuff. Like that is amazing. That is just insane. Please, I just wanted you to touch on just kind of how does a person do that?
No, he's so much energy. It was unbelievable. And he still had time for people as well. I mean, he would have played the guitar and sang for us and, young people, and he would have had that time for you. And as I say, I mean, he was very much into setting up even local sporting groups for particularly soccer, and that he loved football himself. But things like that, activity-based, community-based politics, in my opinion, was what he did then. Obviously, we wouldn't have maybe called it that way back in 1976. Yeah. And as you said, he was only here for a short period of time. Like, I mean, and I often wonder, if he had been here longer, if he hadn't been rearrested in October when he was, he probably would have made an even bigger sort of impact in the area. But I mean, even the legacy that he's left today with the Scoil na Frisige and the community activism, we wouldn't have had the community development that we have now in this area if it hadn't been for Bobby Sands.
Oh, that is an amazing story, and honestly something to think about, of just all the things he could have done. That would totally, that's amazing. Now, Bobby's arrested later on and goes back to prison. You yourself are arrested in 1980 and are sent to prison. And I want to transition just for a couple of minutes to talk about Armagh prison and those kinds of things, because I don't believe that it's a subject that a lot of people know about. Can you just kind of give us a brief overview of Armagh prison and the women who were there and kind of just those things?
Yeah. Well, I was arrested on March 1980. So when I went into Armagh, I was a remand prisoner. And the sentenced women, Republican women who were on protest, were in A wing. When I went in, I was in B wing. And they had been on protest for the same amount of years as the men in the H blocks, but the women wore their own clothes, so there was no blanket protest. But in February of 1980, the month before, several weeks before I came in, they had been forced onto a no wash protest as well. What happened was the prison wardens had attacked them in their cells, and there had been a search, and the women had been attacked. So they weren't allowed out. We were using, it was an old prison, so you use chamber pots then for your toilet. So they weren't allowed out to empty those chamber pots, so they had to put them under the door. It was the only place for them, out of their cells. So they were then forced onto that no wash protest, as well as the no work protest that they had been on for several years beforehand. So when I came in, they were in A wing. So we would only have seen each other at a weekly time at Mass on a Sunday. So the remand prisoners would have brought over, things like cigarettes for them, or, sweets and things like that, and also because we would have had more visits, we would have got comms, what was called communications. There were small comms, there were letters. So we would have brought that over and things like that. And then whenever the first hunger strikes began in October, there were 3 women who joined the first hunger strike. Maria Farrell, who was a prison OC at that time, and then she stood down and Sheila became the OC. Maria, as you know, was later assassinated by the SAS in Gibraltar. And then there was Mary Doyle and there was Maria Nugent. So they were the 3 women who joined the first hunger strike. And I remember because the women then, they were very, very pale. This was even before the hunger strike began. All the women were very pale. They hadn't been washed in quite a number of months. and they weren't allowed out of their cells, and they had to, you know, they were on the no wash protest, the same as the men in the H block. So, you know, they looked very, and they had to solely live on prison food because there was no other food, you know, there was no food parcels or anything. So they were very very thin already, you know. And when the 3 women on hunger strike went off to the hospital wing after a period of time, they were quite, you know, thin already, and they were quite weak. So then when this first hunger strike finished, and then the second hunger strike began in 1981, it was a decision was taken for the women not to participate in that. So I was sentenced in March, I think about March 6th, my trial started, the 1st or 2nd of March. So Bobby had already begun his first hunger strike. And I can remember when I first came into prison in 1980, my first visit, I got a letter from him. My family had brought this letter up that his family had left in, and because he had heard I'd been arrested, and he basically was saying in the letter, you know, if there's anything you need, if there's anything you want, just let my mommy or some of the family know. And I just thought, because sorry,
wait a second, just for my own, because you've said a lot, but in my own, you go to prison, and Bobby, who is now on hunger strike, sends you a letter to check and see if you're okay.
Sorry, he wasn't on hunger strike then. This was when I was first arrested in 1980.
Okay.
This was when I went in 1980. But he was on the no wash. He'd been on the no wash for several years. He was on the blanket for several years. So I mean, his conditions were barbaric. I mean, the conditions in the prisons for both the women who were on the no wash and the men in the no wash were horrific. So, but and that's he was sent me this letter to make sure I was okay, and to make sure, you know, if I needed anything, and that would have been that's the type of person he would have, you know, he was. That was just the type of person. He was a very caring individual, a very sincere individual. So, I mean, that there always stuck in my head as well. So whenever, as I say, the hunger strike, then the first hunger strike, or the second hunger strike started, the no wash protest ended. So in the H blocks it was phased out, but in Armagh, because there was so little women there, I think it was about 29 or 30 of us then, you know, it's because they wanted the whole focus to be on the hunger strike, and you know, so the no wash was sort of phased out. But then, as I say, just to think about the 1981 and then being in prison in 1981 during the hunger strikes, it was very, very difficult for all of us and the women that were there. I mean, some of the women had brothers in the H blocks. Some of the women had partners in the H blocks. Dolores Thomas McElwee, who later died on hunger strike, he was in the blocks. And a lot of us had friends there who we knew, you know, who we were close to, and everything else. So, you know, you would have been able to get, you know, some communication between them. So there was a great comradeship between the women and the men, you know, as well, you know, because a lot of us would have known people in that. So it was very, very difficult, and obviously for people on the outside as well. The year of the hunger strike was very, very difficult for people. I can remember somebody coming up on a visit, and there was quite a number of young children who were killed in 1981 with plastic bullets, because people would have been out protesting, and you know, they were just met with brute force basically. And I remember them saying about them putting the wee helmets, you know, the bicycle helmets on their kids. Sure. When they were bringing them to protests or to try to protect them. That's how bad it was for wee children then. There was actually one child around the corner here from me who was killed, Caroline Kelly. She was killed on, I think it was Francis Hughes, around his anniversary, you know, around when he died. So that was happening all the time. Young Julie Livingstone and Lena doing it. So that type of thing there, you know, was happening on the streets as well. So it was a very, very dark time for everyone, you know.
At some point, I would love to have you back on and spend more time just speaking about Armagh prison. I know it's a difficult subject matter, but I don't think it's something that a lot of people are aware of. I don't think it's something that a lot of people are exposed to, but it's so important that that history be told and that people hear it and actually understand the conditions that you all were living in and the struggle that was going on inside, and just all of it needs to be something that we do not ever allow to be forgotten, in my opinion. I want to talk specifically about what it was like to go through the hunger strikes in prison, and you know, how did you hear about Bobby passing, and just kind of the mood and the tenor and those things. Can you kind of share a little bit about that? Is that comfortable?
Yeah. I mean, there was the comradeship was very, very good. You know, I mean, people were all very close. I think that when Bobby was elected that time as the MP, you know, there was like almost like a euphoria. You know, we were very hopeful that things, you know, might be okay. You know, that we sort of way would have gotten our 5 demands, and you know, things, you know, would have turned out okay. And then I think that a couple of days before he died, he had got very poorly, and his family had been sent for and that, and he went into, I think at that stage it was like he'd lost consciousness and that, went into a coma. And I remember, because we had wee small they were like, if you like, wee small medicine bottle radio. We called them crystallized radios they were, and we had a few of them in the prison. And so we would have been able to listen to news, what was going on outside, because it was the only way you would have heard it, really. So whenever we were getting locked up on the Monday night, I think it was the Monday night, I can't remember, it was a Monday night. And then the early hours of Tuesday morning, I remember, because you were up constantly, everybody was in the same state, nobody was really sleeping, and there was, you know, was really sleeping that well, and you got the news on, and I can remember listening, because I had one of the radios that night, and I remember listening and them saying about all the rioting and all that there on the streets of Belfast. So I just knew that he had died, and it was very, very, it was heartbreaking for everybody, but especially heartbreaking watching the families. You know, the families were just, it was, and especially because, you know, I knew Bobby's family too, and watching his mommy and daddy and his sisters, and it was very, very difficult for to watch it. And you know, as I say, everybody was the same in the prison. All the women were the same. You know, everybody was just devastated, basically. And then, obviously, you know, going on through the hunger strikes, and then other comrades dying, and you know, it was a very, very difficult time for everybody. But I think especially, there was one, as I said, Dolores was engaged to Thomas McElwee, and Dolores they had been arrested from 1976, so they hadn't seen each other in all that time, you know, because of the protests and all, you know, you didn't have inter-prison visits, and which became later and that. So Dolores had put in to go up and see Thomas anyway, and she went up and went and see, and she came back, and she was really, really in great form, because she thought he was really, you know, he was in good form, and you know, he was very sort of lucid and all that there. She was saying that he was talking away and everything else. And then we heard the next day on the radio that Tommy McElwee had died, and we were going, you know, my God, we thought we'd heard it wrong. You know, we were afraid of saying anything, because and I think it was Sheila or Mairead actually had to bring Dolores in and tell Dolores, and that was how she heard it, because you know, at that stage there was no visits, and that you could have, and so that was the way. So I mean, that type of thing was very, very, I mean, obviously difficult for Dolores, and you know, the rest of the people that knew her, and you know, and all that. So all that, you know, those are things there that you sort of, I would stick out in my memory of it, you know, from the prison perspective. So as I say, you know, it was very difficult for people, especially when you knew people, you know, and they were dying, and you know, and I mean, you just felt that you know, you just their courage and everything else, you know, just still amazes me. They're so courageous, they were, the whole 10 of them. And the families as well, you know, the way, and just probably their determination as well. And, you know, it's just so sad, you know, even all these years later, it's really sad to think about it, you know.
The courage of those, I completely agree with. I'm always struck with the strength of, of the other prisoners that were going around it, be it, you know, Bick or yourself or Sheila, or, I mean, just, I'm always so in awe of the strength, because you're not, and I know this is, you know, age does not determine character or strength, and I'm aware of that, but in my head, you know, you're all in your early 20s at this point, or you know, right around that. It's not a, it's so young in my head to be that strong and to have such amazing will and character. Is just, I'm in awe of it. I'm in awe of it every time I think about it. I can't tell you how impressed I am with your strength and courage. I really get touched about it every time I go through it. And thank you so much for sharing those very personal stories, because I think that they really resonate with an audience and really kind of let people know who they are and whatnot. I want to transition just a little bit and go back to talking about you in particular. You get out of prison in the late 1980s, mid to late 1980s, and then you start working your community. You go right back and go right into working in your community. You go to work for Sinn Féin in the POW and the women's department, and kind of start building this community aspect life. Can you talk about, you know, what, you know, your time when you got out of prison and kind of what you got into? And you go all the way to become a junior minister. So, I mean, it becomes this lifelong involvement. And I want to make sure people hear that story.
Yeah, no, I got out in 1990, September 1990. And basically came back into live in Twinbrook again. My family home was in Twinbrook. My mum and dad lived there, and mum still does live here. And joined the POW department, as you said, and obviously Sinn Féin, and was part of the Sinn Féin women's department. And I suppose our one of the roles in the POW department, myself and another fella, Cheeser, we visited prisoners in the European, that were in jail in Europe, and liaised with their families and that. And so we sort of went to see some of those prisoners. Also, again, I became very much involved in the local community. And before I went to stand as an MLA in 2007, I worked with the Greater Twinbrook and Poleglass Community Forum, and I also worked in the community drugs program down in Falls Community Council. So I was very much into that type of work. And then I stood as an MLA in 2007 for the first time. I was co-opted as a councillor on Lisburn Council the year before. And then I stood as an MLA in 2007 and was elected. And then I stood twice then after that in 2000, and I can't remember the dates, 2011 and then 2016. But I was a junior minister from 2012 in the Assembly. So that basically was, and you know, when people think too, it was almost like a natural progression in terms of, you know, you were active before you went into prison in the community, and then when you come out again, you were involved in the community, in community activism as well. And I think that's quite the same sort of story for a lot of ex-Republican prisoners. Even now today, we have, you know, ex-Republican prisoners that, you know, right across the local community sector, working in their local community at grassroots level, you know, and I think that's a very, very important thing. And for me, that was something that always, again, going back to Bobby, he was very much of the opinion, you help people at a local grassroots level, you become involved in community activism, you change people's lives in that way, you're agents of change. And that agents of change has always been there right through. Because as a political party, that's what Sinn Féin are as well. You know, they're agents of change. They're not there to keep the status quo, or they're not there to keep things. They're always developing local communities. They're always developing in terms of local politics, and then the national politics. I mean, you see now, I mean, you have the whole conversation, the whole thrust, the whole drive now for unity. And that whole thing coming from that's you know, the whole history and the whole development for where we are today all came from all those years ago, right through that whole political struggle, you know, for everybody. So I think that is a very important part as well, you know, and we have, and obviously, I mean, you know, still today, I mean, I'm still involved in Sinn Féin, I'm still involved in community politics. So that for me is a very, very, I suppose, part of me as well. You know, I maybe not involved in electoral politics anymore in terms of being an MLA, but I'm still very much involved at a local level.
As a very proud union organizer, I really want a lot of my colleagues to see this section of the interview, because I think you say it so well. And I was just sitting here thinking, like, I need to go back and write all this down and just start. I think that's a beautiful statement on being community, and you really tie in your whole life. Really, that's an amazing way to look at your life. I think that's great. Now, my last question is one that I ask everybody, just to increase the world's knowledge and whatnot. If you were to meet a person for the first time, just, you know, bump into a stranger on the street and we're talking with them, and at the end of the conversation they said, I want to learn more, what is it that you recommend to them? Is it a book that they should read? Is it a podcast? Is it an album? Like, what is it that you would recommend to a total stranger to learn more about anything?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about learning more about Bobby Sands, I would say talk to people who knew him. You know, there's a lot of people in the community. I think just look at the history. I mean, I wouldn't have any one specific book to sort of, but just to look at our struggle and the people that like Bobby who were involved in our struggle, the people who give their lives for our struggle, the people who give many, many years of their lives in prison, and right through to the ordinary people on the streets. I mean, we had a lot of support as prisoners in the jails, and sometimes the people on the outside don't get the recognition that really they deserve. But the people on the streets who protest, who went everywhere, who went, you know, places, and you've seen the women on the blankets, you know what I mean, yeah, going to America and going to all those places. So look at that and just look at the development of our struggle. And look at the way the hunger strike internationalized our struggle, because before we felt very much alone, and you know, but we have had so much international support as well in our struggle, and I think that's a very, very important thing. I would be sort of a thing. I don't know what particular book I would say, a particular thing, but I would just say, you know, the history of it and the development of it, coming from where we were to where we are today. And obviously, I mean, in my opinion anyway, we're going to be very, very soon, you know, we're on the cups, if you like, of a united Ireland. And I think that is, and as famous saying from Bobby is, our revenge will be the laughter of our children, and that will be our revenge. That'll be our goal, because that's what we all wanted. We wanted unity, we wanted equality, and we wanted, you know, to sort of have an Ireland, a new Ireland of equals for everybody. So that would be something that I would leave them with.
Jennifer, you are so amazing and so awesome. Please come back. I want to have lots of conversations. I got so many questions to ask you, but we're gonna wrap up for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Thank you for sharing. That was awesome. I certainly hope that you know how much we appreciate everything you've done and everything you continue to do.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Oh, outstanding. So thank you folks for tuning in and watching. Again, please share these videos far and wide. Please push them out to everybody. these are not just meant for a small community. We want to make sure that the world knows what's going on. So to my brothers and sisters in Canada, to my brothers and sisters across the states, and to my Hibernian brothers in particular, I want to encourage you to watch and share as much as you can. But until next time, Slán.